Rick's been a part of our church for, I'm going to guess, somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 20 years, off and on.
Closer to 40 years.
40, well, okay, with Carol. Rick and I got introduced to each other a few years back. He was retiring from the military, and what was your last rank?
My last rank was major. I took an early retirement.
And you served for how many years?
16 years.
And he came to me and said he wanted to be a pastor. When a military guy with guns and bullets comes and says he wants to be a pastor, you kind of think, are you kidding me? Rick is this gentle shepherd. He is not, a hawk that wants to go around blowing everything up. And in the process of him being a part of our church and trying to discover whether or not God would call him into the ministry, God said, no way. We want you back in the Washington, D.C. area. You're with the RAND Corporation?
That's correct.
How long?
Been with RAND since 1999.
And how many, tell us a little bit about, since that time, your role. Who have you given advice to? What did you do in Iraq during the Iraq War?
Yeah, in 1999, I first started to do some work on what was then a cottage industry, known as Homeland Security. And that obviously took a different level of importance after the 9/11 attacks. And from that time, I started to do a lot of work on Iraq, what was going on the various stages of the Iraq War. And in 2006, I volunteered for 3 months to go to Iraq.
You were there longer than 3 months.
And I stayed there for 5 years. And during that time period, I had the privilege of working as a senior advisor to the two-star, who was the director of operations, and also did a lot of, provided special projects to the commanding generals, both General Odierno and General Austin. And I continue to provide those types of analysis.
And recently, a couple weeks ago, you appeared before who in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, I received an invitation from the chairman of the House Foreign Relations Committee, asked me if I would appear before the full committee in order to give my assessment of the growing strategic threat of ISIS. And I turned that request into a broader discussion on the growing strategic threat from Islamist ideologies.
And you spoke part of that panel for almost an hour.
It was 3 hours.
3 hours. And they listened to every word you said. Now, you cannot, as a RAND Corporation employee, you cannot be political.
Correct.
You're supposed to speak in a bipartisan manner.
Correct.
Correct. So you're in good company because there's a mixture of people here tonight. Those that could be called Democrats, Republicans, Independents, but none of that exists tonight. We're all Christians. We're all trying to follow the Lord Jesus Christ. So if you say something that sounds political, say in favor of the Democrats, if you say something that sounds political in favor of the Republicans, and if somebody makes a comment, I'm throwing them out. Okay? So
okay.
We just want you to share with us about ISIS. We don't want to turn this into a political thing. This is not an opportunity to be pro-Republican, pro-Democrat, pro-this or pro-that. So share with us what you believe we should know about ISIS. Congregation, would you welcome, please, Rick Brennan.
Thanks, Walter. Let me start off by saying the same thing I told the Congressional Committee. Part of this briefing or a discussion is going to be based upon research that I've done at RAND and has been RAND-approved research. And part of it is going to be based upon my years in the military and those years I spent in Iraq and the knowledge that I gained there, where that we don't have any published research out of, but it still kind of colors the way that I think about the world. The slide you see above you right now, when I talk about the growing strategic threat of radical Islam, that's most of the world that we'll be talking about tonight. And what you'll see at various points in terms of what the threats are. If you go to the next slide, we have, in the news media talks about ISIS a lot, and it talks about Al-Qaeda a lot, and it talks about all that's going on in Sunni Islam. But the Islamist ideology is not unique to Sunni. There is a Shia variant of Islamism that is at least as dangerous to world security as the Sunni variant is. So what I'd like to do is to really start off talking a little bit about the kind of the foundations of Shia Islam and their extremist apocalyptic view of the world, and then take that over into Sunni Islam. So the first bullet that I'd like to do, when we think about Islam, 610 AD is the start of it. 33 or by 633, Muhammad dies, and it's at that point that the schism in Islam begins, because Islam, the Shia version of Islam, believed that the leadership of Islam should be passed along through the bloodline of Muhammad. And the other version was that, the Sunni version was that what would actually take place was that there would be a kind of a vote and the most qualified person would take over leadership. And so there became a very, very deep schism that took place in 633. You hear the word caliphate all the time. Caliph means successor. It was a successor to Muhammad. And so when you look at a caliphate is the lands which the caliph leads. And so today in ISIS, when you've got Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi saying that he's setting up the caliphate in the Islamic State in Iraq, what he is saying is that he is the lawful successor to Muhammad, and he will lead the Islamic State in that region. I talked about the cousin of Muhammad. His name is Ali. He was rejected. Ali was also not only the cousin, but also the husband of Muhammad's daughter. And so this, again, started the split. What you have then taking place is what they talk about as the rule of the 12 Imams. The 12 Imams were the first 12 leaders of Shia Islam. And these Imams are venerated in Shia. They're kind of like saints in the Catholic Church. And they're prayed to. They have pilgrimages to where they go. This makes them completely different than Sunni. In addition to the Quran, one of the things that a very important part of the Islamic faith is what they call the hadiths. And hadith is the writings of the early church fathers, if you will. So the writings of those 12 Imams have been passed along through history. Those help to interpret what the Quran means. The other important thing to remember is the 12th Imam. There are various different sects of Shia Islam, but the largest today is in Iran. And they're called Twelvers because what they believe is that the 12th Imam never died. There was something they call the occultation, and in that occultation, he is now hidden. He walks among us, and someday he's going to return. And there's some commonalities that we'll get to in a second. Anyway, the fourth Imam, who was Ali, so Imam who was rejected here, eventually became an Imam. He was killed at Karbala. Karbala is in southern Iraq, and a couple things happened there. One was there was a dispersion and really persecution of Shia from that point forward. But the other thing is that because he was viewed as the first righteous leader of Islam, there are now Iranians that go through pilgrimages through Iraq as they go on their Hajj. And so when you would hear about the car bombings that would take place and Al-Qaeda in Iraq killing civilians on a pilgrimage, these were Shia going from Iran through Iraq to Saudi Arabia, and they were being killed because of their religious beliefs. The next major piece that kind of reflects where we are today is the Persian dynasty. With this dynasty, Shia Islam was established as a state religion, and it flourished in Persia, modern-day Iran, parts of Iraq, parts of other areas in that region. And so what you see is a concentration of Shia Islam at that one location, with Sunni Islam being around throughout the rest of the world. You've got the Shah dynasty that follows that. The Shah were Sunni. They then abandoned Shia Islam as the primary state religion. But in the process of doing that, they also made it more secular. And then that brings us up to 1979. And that's where you have the Iranian Revolution. And I may just talk very quickly about this because it sets the stage for the conflict that's there today. The Ayatollah Khomeini was the leading Shia imam or mullah of that era. And he had been exiled from Iran. And as a leader in Islamic law, he said, it's not right. The only type of law that we recognize is God's law. And we shouldn't have man interpreting God's law. And as a result of that, we need one person who is the arbiter, who establishes what God's law is for the Shia religion. And it was from that he developed a concept that they call the Walayat-e-Faqih, which is the rule of the jurist. That's what exists today in Tehran. When you hear the word supreme leader, he is the supreme jurist who is appointed by God to make decisions as it relates not only to how people live their lives, but also to governance. So, real quickly then, since 1979, Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism. It exports its revolution throughout the region, and I'll show you a graph on that in a little bit. They have an organization that's called the Revolutionary Guards Quds Force. Quds means Jerusalem, so that is their Jerusalem force that arms, trains, and equips organizations such as Hezbollah, Hamas, the violent Shia groups in Iraq, numbering 40, 50, 60,000, as well as the Houthi in Yemen. Then their religious doctrine, I think it's kind of interesting just to point out that they believe that the mission of the Islamic Republic is to usher in the return of the 12th Imam. And he is their Mahdi. If the Shia say it's M-E-H-D-I, Sunni is M-A-H-D-I, the same thing. But his mission will be to purify Islam and prepare the road for the return of Jesus Christ, who is the Messiah, who will kill the Antichrist and will unite mankind. Part of their view of the world, of their apocalyptic vision, comes from the Old Testament. And so their teachings and understanding of the end of times is very common to some of the things that we would see. Next slide, please. Okay, on the Sunni side, again, common stuff in Islam. Muhammad dies, they select the caliph. They go through what they call the four righteous caliphs. These are the people that they believe were the only caliphs that were really truly anointed by Muhammad and anointed by God in order to lead. And so that took place in a very short period of time. From that time period, they grew, and while Shia has kind of a hierarchy of mullahs that kind of go up to the Ayatollah with the leader, the Sunni side is very dispersed. There is no one central leader. It's kind of like being a Baptist, if you will. We have all these various forms of religion, and people have common ideologies and common core beliefs, but people take it off in different directions. And so not only Baptists, but other forms of Protestant religions. There's no hierarchy, it's dispersed, and you can have, sometimes there'll be disagreements in teachings. The couple of things happened. The Ottoman Caliphate was the largest. Ottoman, as you may recall, is Turkey, today modern-day Turkey. But what you have at the end of World War I is this thing called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was an secret agreement between France and Britain that led to the Treaty of Versailles. This was the agreement by which the Allies determined that they were going to punish the Turks and they were going to draw the lines of modern-day Middle East. They didn't draw them along the lines of nationalism, religious sects, or anything else. They were drawn along the lines of colonialism. And that set up the stage for lots of problems. So let me go back a little bit. 1744, in Saudi Arabia, there was a meeting between Muhammad al-Wahhab and Muhammad bin Saud. Wahhab was a religious leader. He was a fundamentalist. He was puritanical. He was convinced that the Islam was being perverted by the infidels and everything else that had taken place, and he wanted to go back to the ancient teachings. And so he established this very, very strict version of Islamic teachings in Saudi Arabia. He happened to have a meeting with bin Saud. Well, you hear bin Saud from Saudi Arabia. It's a Saud family that still rules in Saudi Arabia. And this meeting led to this pact. And the pact went something like this: I will allow you to practice your religion the way that you want to, in return for giving me loyalty as a person who's going to govern. And that exists to this day. So you hear Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which is where they primarily are, but that Wahhabist view, it still has that pact. So in 1990, for example, when U.S. forces went in to kick the Iraqis out of Kuwait, there was a deal made with the King Saud, with the House of Saud and the leaders of the Wahhabism that said, pass a fatwa saying that I have the authority to do this, to allow infidels in our country for this purpose. And they did that. Now that weakened the Wahhabi leaders, because some people looked at that and said, well, if you look back at Sykes Peak and the colonialism, and now you're inviting these infidels back into our country, you're just as bad as they are. And has started this very ultra-radical version of Wahhabism, which is where Osama bin Laden comes from. And then, so again, 1979 to 2001, a number of things happened. Muslim Brotherhood, another Islamist organization based upon anti-colonialism. You have Majid fighting, where you had bin Laden, Taliban seized power. I talked about the Persian Gulf. Al-Qaeda gets a safe haven. And by 2001 to present, what you have is the growth of this Salafi jihad movement. They share a common ideology. And when I hear people on the news saying, well, they're not Islamic, they're people who have perverted Islam, that's not true. They're very Islamic. They're very radical Islamic. They peg themselves on one end. But one of the things that I find when you talk to people in Saudi Arabia, for example, and they say, I disapprove of what al-Baghdadi is doing, but I understand why he's doing it. It's kind of like Christians who, when they see somebody who kills an abortion doctor, says, I disagree with what that person did, but I understand why he did it. That's just wrong. Now, what happens in Christianity, at least in the United States, is that we come together and we say, that's wrong. That's not happening in Wahhabism. And so you have, and numbers are kind of confusing at this point, but somewhere between 5 and 10 million would be kind of a broad estimate of people who believe who are religious people, who believe that in a puritanical view of Islam, who want to see this proceed, but they won't challenge the practices that are being done in their name. And I'll get to that again in a second. So the Wahhabi Salafi jihad combined with this anti-imperialism kind of forms the basis of this ideology. Told you that they're very Islamic, puritanical, fundamental, strict. There are certain rules you have to follow. Shia are viewed as apostate by these people. And the Quran and Hadith state that the penalty for being apostate is death. And so you can take this puritanical view and say, I'm going to kill all the Shia because the Shia are apostate. They knew Islam, and now they've rejected the true teachings of it. Again, end of times, they believe that there's going to be a time when the caliphate will be established, the army of Rome, unclear what that means, could be a Western army, could be Turkish army, because at that point, when these were writing, Rome was kind of Constantinople. So unclear exactly what that meant. But they're going to be defeated at the city of Datkuk, which is a city that's probably about 50 miles from Turkey in Syria. Caliphate will be established by the Mahdi, and then what you'll have is Jesus will come and kill the Antichrist and unite mankind. So that common thread is kind of, I think, something I think just to keep in mind. Go to the next slide, please. I'll say, so quickly, take a look at where we are. Red are Shia. So the Shia Islam, I told you, by the basis of the Persian dynasty, are basically in this area here. There's a majority here in Bahrain, as well as in Lebanon, and then in Yemen, it's kind of a 50-50 split. But when you look at some of the areas where there's conflict, Bahrain, Shia Islam 70%, but it's being ruled by the Sunni, and ruled by Sunni with the support of the Sauds, and so they're a Wahhabi sect of Sunni. Lebanon, pretty well split, big battle, the rest are Christians and others. And then look in Syria, where you have the exact reverse of what was in Bahrain. You've got 74% Sunni, 13% Shia. They're considered a cult in Shia Islam. But nonetheless, that group in Syria is being supported by Iran. So when you look at what's happening in that region of the world today, you've got a competition for power based upon these ancient animosities that go back to the Ottomans and the Persians and the Arabs. It's also the ancient animosities of the Sunni and the Shia, and battles within Shia and Sunni. And so it's a very, very complex mix that is made for a very explosive situation. Next slide. Okay, so today in the Middle East, if you take a look at what Iran has done, first let me just start off to begin with saying Iran is the greatest power in that region. Hands down. They've got ballistic missiles that can reach Jerusalem, and within a few years, we think they'll be able to reach Europe. They have cyber technologies that are among the top in the world. They also are the largest state sponsor of terrorism. So during after our involvement in the Iraq War, they became very, very assertive. And what you've seen them doing recently is, as the Assad regime, I told you they're Shia, a Shia minority, but as he started to fall, they sent all their resources in to support them. They had Quds force, their Jerusalem force on the ground. They had all the Shia militias that they've armed, trained, and equipped, 5 or 6 different variants from Iraq. They had Hezbollah, all there to fight on the side of Assad, with Russian support, by the way. At the same time, so they're making these inroads here. They're supporting the revolutions going on in Lebanon. When you listen to the Prime Minister of Israel talk about the threat, well, take a look at this threat that's coming that's going from the north through Iraq, which is now a Shia-led government, and this more recently in Yemen, where they've been the Iranians have been airdropping equipment to support the Houthis to defeat the Sunni government that was there. And so the danger that these countries in the region are seeing is already there's an island right in the middle of this Strait of Hormuz that has a channel or from that island to Iran is 50 miles. And all tanker traffic, all economic traffic has to go between that channel. And so they can completely choke off the Persian Gulf from that location. But if you go down here to the Red Sea, there's another choke point. And if they were able to put a Shia Iranian supported government there, they could also choke off all transit to the Red Sea, therefore making the Suez Canal irrelevant. And so when you hear today that Egypt is sending their fleet down to help defeat the Houthis, they're seeing this as a threat because all trade from Europe has to go through the Strait or through this passageway down to the Red Sea, and that's Egypt's life's blood. So today, I believe Iran and the Sunni countries in the region are in a state of war. We don't talk about that, but this isn't just conflict, they're at war. And some of these countries believe that their very survival depends on where this goes. The other thing I want to point out is that Iran has been at war with the United States since 1979. We just refuse to accept it. Go from the Beirut bombings to what happened in Iraq. You don't hear about what happened in Iraq much, but Iran was responsible for killing and wounding half of the U.S. casualties that were there. We did nothing to Iran during that time period. We have been so afraid, Republicans and Democrats, about what Iran might do if we did something, that we do nothing. And in the process of doing nothing, we embolden them to do even more. I think we're also seeing the near complete breakdown of order in both the Middle East and North Africa, and I'll show you a map of this in a little bit. And what we're really seeing is it's almost a new political order is taking place in that region. It's trying to give birth to this new political order that nobody knows exactly where it's going to, where this is leading. Talked about Iran is on the march. They boasted about controlling Arab capitals in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, and have really set their sights on Bahrain. Bahrain would be a great crown jewel for them. And the last bullet, as a result of our experience in the Middle East and our withdrawal of forces, and what these leaders believe to be our willingness to disengage from that region and turn or pivot or rebalance the Pacific, whatever words the administration is using, they have come to the conclusion that we can't be trusted. And because we can't be trusted, they're now doing things independent on their own. And I just wanted to point this, General Petraeus, probably 2 weeks ago, as we were all talking about ISIS, made this comment about that the greatest threat to Iraq's stability and the broader regional security, regional equilibrium is not ISIS, but is Shia and Iran. I think that is how most people who study the region view the situation today. ISIS is a threat that's got to be dealt with. It's the wolf at the sled, if you will. But right behind that wolf is an even bigger and more dangerous wolf that we are not paying a significant amount of attention to. Next slide. So, real quick, we can go from here, looking at the number of jihadi groups in the 2000 period, and look at that radical explosion that kind of accompanies the Arab Spring, which many of us now kind of like to refer to as the Arab Winter. So an explosion almost exponentially in these number of groups. Next slide. If you want to take a look at the number of individual jihadis willing to fight and die for their cause, this is a RAND estimate that we view at this point in time ranging somewhere between, this was a year and a half ago, but from about 30,000 to 90,000. Numbers are much greater today. But those are people who are willing to fight and die for these causes. Next slide. And here are the number of attacks that have taken place. Again, if you go back to 2007, you see 100, and now we're almost up to 1,000, and we're beyond that with what ISIS has been doing. Next slide. Okay, so we can get into question and answer. I can talk a little bit about this, but let me just kind of point out a couple things. One is in January of 2014, the Islamic State took over the city of Fallujah. And for a year prior to that, and all the way through to the next year, the Iraqi government had been pleading with the United States for support, and we refused to give it to them. And it wasn't until June when you saw ISIS take Mosul, go down, threaten Erbil, the slaughters of innocents that took place under ISIS, and the political pressure that was being put on the president, that you saw the United States get engaged. Today we have roughly 3,000 people that are in Iraq today. Why didn't the Iraqi army hold? And we can, if that's a question what you want to, we can get to that. There's some complex reasons of that. But I think the important part today is ISIS controls 35,000 square miles, about the size of the state of Indiana. They've established systems of governance. So this is their beginnings. It's not to say that they can't be defeated, but it's going to take a lot more than I think we're doing today. Next slide. All right. I told you I wanted to talk about the region for a second, and I'm going to go over this very quickly. We've spent most of our time talking about this area right through here. Talked about the Wahhabi, and I use that black area to talk about Wahhabism and that kind of the deal that they made with the kingdom of Saud. But what I want to do also is just look at all of these groups that are throughout this region. The black flag reflects some version of Sunni Islamist organization. They fight each other for control because they want to be the ones in lead. The reason why ISIS is winning today, is getting so many recruits, is because they're winning. And they're able to draw in and say, be part of this magnificent movement that's going to be ready to set up the caliph so when the Mahdi comes, that we're ready for him. And that is appealing to people in their early 20s and 30s who want to make a point, make a difference in their life. Next slide. A few concluding thoughts, and then I'll go to questions and answers. It's growing exponentially. The good news is that there's been lots of calls for reformation within Islam, from inside Islam. The most important two have been President al-Sisi in Egypt and King Abdullah in Jordan. The United States needs to get behind these people and understand that if we're going to defeat the radical Islamist ideology, we got to get behind the people in Islam who are willing to make the change. We need some sort of global strategy for how to deal with this. We don't have one today. We're kind of frozen with how do you deal with this religious aspect of it. And again, I think it's got to be from within Islam, but we've got, much like we had with strategy of containment and dealing with communism, there's another ideology that threatens our way of life. Sunni and Shia want to destroy our way of life on the radical side because they see this as being an antithesis to how Allah wants them to live. And we need to understand that. Talked about the complex mixture of what's going on, the struggle for dominance. We've got a lot of our regional partners want to do more, but they can't do more without us. American leadership is necessary. And that means at some point, and this is where I kind of go into my own assessment on what takes place, but we may need to put some of our men and women in uniform back on the ground to support these men and women who are doing the bulk of the fighting. And I'm not talking about 100,000, but maybe it's 10 or 20, because when you're talking about putting people on the ground fighting for their own lives, and you have to steel their spine. If these people from Iraq or neighboring countries believe that they're going to die, having an American nearby, knowing that he's got the reach and power of the United States behind him, gives him more courage to stand up and fight. We also have a lot of capabilities we bring that isn't the individual soldier, but by having the soldier there, you're able to apply. And then I talked about the perceived disengagement. Bottom line, though, homeland, threat's real, but don't overstate it. We've got lots of good things in place. So let me just stop and...
Yeah, stay right out here. Don't go anywhere.
All right.
So you lit the fire tonight. So we're going to burn you.
I'm ready to be burned.
Okay, any questions? A good question, go to the mic here so everybody can at least hear you. If somebody else wants to step up to the mic. D, you're first. Now remember, you're asking questions. This is not a time for you to open your mouth except to ask questions. You can make a comment, but keep your comment short. D?
Just a question. About 40% of the world's oil reserves are in the, quote, Arab world. What do you see happening to the oil? Are the Shiites and Sunnis protecting the oil fields, or are they willing to blow each oil fields up to try to take away their money?
That's a good question. The reality is that every one of those countries is dependent on oil sales. So their economies cannot survive without the sale of oils. However, you have back deals that can be done. You have periods of time that they might be able to survive without oil. So I don't think you're going to see a cutoff, and that's where the battle's taking place. Who controls the oil? Iran would like to use that as a weapon, and you've got the Sunnis who are trying to make certain that they can't.
But is the Shiites willing to destroy the Sunnis' oil to take away their money and vice versa? They both kind of say we'll leave the oil alone.
No, I don't think they're saying anything's off the table in terms of if it gets to that point of war. But I think that they more likely be willing to fight on the periphery rather than attack each other's economic base, because they need that too.
Okay, Charlie?
We spent years,
It's okay. Just keep talking.
we spent years training Iraqi troops. We go over there and they get in major battles. I know we didn't leave the reserve force back, but why did they run? Why did they not stand and fight?
That's a good question. For those of you who couldn't hear,
Yeah, restate the question. We're okay, Jim. Kenny, we're okay. Keep going.
the question is that we spent billions of dollars arming, training, and equipping the Iraqi forces. And we left, and even though we didn't have a residual force, we left. The first time they were in major combat, they collapsed. Why? First of all, I think it's important that when you look at where we were in 2011, there was an internal assessment that was done by U.S. Forces Iraq that highlighted key deficiencies of the Iraqi military. And they were in the areas of maintenance, logistics, training, intelligence, operational planning, and most critically, air. They have no air support. There was also a level of corruption that was embedded into the military that we knew was there, that we were working with. But the thing that really kind of threw everything into a death spiral was the degree to which Prime Minister Maliki politicized the military ranks and gave positions to people based upon patronage to him. And so you then he did away with the competent generals and colonels and put his own cronies in power. And in the process of doing that, they also said, well, they use cash payment. So they would overinflate the number of troops that they said were present for duty and then pocket the money. And so that level of corruption took place. And so when those soldiers got hit on the ground, we had created what was essentially a checkpoint army. It was not yet ready for full combat operations. So when they got hit by a full combat force, that checkpoint collapsed, and a checkpoint after checkpoint collapsed. And they knew that if they were captured, they were going to be killed.
Okay, Charlie, did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. John?
Mine is somewhat of a compound question. First part.
Make them simple, John. Simple.
Yes, sir.
I'm teasing you.
Great presentation, by the way, Rick. The question that I have is from an eschatological standpoint. Do you see the commotion in the Middle East as possibly a precursor to the eruption of the Euphrates War? And also, what does this do to our pray for the peace of Jerusalem, country Israel, whose back we are supposed to have?
Good questions. Let me kind of answer this in a couple different ways. First, if we take a look at Jerusalem today, the hatred towards the Jewish state came from that anti-colonial type of ideology. They view that as being a colonization. And so that has fed into the entire narrative that's taken place. But I am worried about our ability to continue to protect Israel. Not our ability to, our willingness to. We have all the ability in the world to provide that. But I think what you're seeing is a willingness to try to find a way to extricate ourselves from the challenges in the Middle East, and trying to find ways to get the Jewish state to find peace with their neighbors. But they have no commonalities to have peace in. If you have one side that calls for your total destruction. And one of the things I didn't mention, Ayatollah Khomeini believed that Israel was the little Satan, and that we were the great Satan. And there are those who say that that is simply hyperbole. I don't believe that. I believe that they truly believe that Israel reflects the fact that Satan is present in that part of the world, and that we are the great Satan that needs to be destroyed. And so when you start talking about nuclear weapons and giving these people a nuclear weapon, what does that mean for nuclear deterrence? And I'm not saying that they wouldn't be rational, but if your view of the world is that you want to usher in the return of the 12th Imam,
Which relates to eschatology.
with relates to eschatology, then all of a sudden having that
Power.
weapon gives you an opportunity to do something that you think God wants you to do. That scares me.
Okay, all right, next question, Wayne?
One of the problems that they have with both Iraq and Iran is they do not have a tradable currency. What's on the table for that? Is DB going to do that? Is Shabibi going to put that together, or is that something that's holding off for Iraq?
Well, the
All right,
dinar.
paraphrase the question so
Yeah,
that some of us can understand it. He's talking just kind of bring it down to simple.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, the question relates to currency that can be used by Iraq and Iran internationally.
Okay.
The Iranian currency has been under so much pressure because they are a state sponsor of terrorism, and we have basically blocked, through economic sanctions and other sanctions, the ability for them to trade the commodities on the international market. That's what's on the table today for being released as part of this nuclear deal, is to give them an ability to open up and be part of the international community in terms of trade, which is why there's those who argue that we should create linkages to make certain that you show proof that you aren't doing more before we open this up. So at this point, that's kind of where we were with Iran. Iraq, the dinar there's a new dinar. The new dinar is being used on the international market. You just can't take it out of their country. So there was a change. The dinar took, I think it was in 2004 or 5, a new dinar took place that they are able to engage in international commerce.
Okay, another quick question. Come on. Step up to the mic.
Real quick.
And before you talk, a little bit chilly in here. I see several of you kind of doing this. Give it a little
perfect.
bit warm. All right.
Turn it down.
Go for it.
What's the difference between ISIS and ISIL? I know the administration calls them ISIL. They don't call them ISIS. We call them ISIS. And then second part, what is Russia sitting back? Where are they involved in this whole thing? Seems like they're kind of if you said there's the wolf and there's another wolf, are they the big bad wolf behind them? And then the third part, were you surprised that Egypt stepped up the way they did, throwing out the Muslim Brotherhood?
All great questions. And I'm going to forget these as I go. ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, IS. One is that group wants to call itself the Islamic State. They have been opposed by many Muslims around the world, saying, you don't represent us, you aren't the Islamic State. ISIL stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. The Arabic version of that is Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham. Al-Sham being of Syria. Those mean exactly the same thing. The RAND Corporation has selected to use Al-Sham to talk about as ISIS because we believe that's truer to the Arabic speech. Second question was Russia, big wolf. That's a huge wolf. They're allied, using rough terms, with Iran. They're key supporters of Assad in Syria. It's unclear whether or not what they're doing, the degree to which we can stop what they're doing, given the level of consent we have with our European partners in NATO and otherwise. Long term, they're a huge threat that we need to deal with. And the second one was Egypt. I am not surprised. Egypt is up until recently, has been the leading Arab country in the region. They see their role as being a leader of Arabs, even though they would prefer to call themselves Egyptians because somehow that's better than Arab. But they are very much engaged in this, and I think you're going to see greater cooperation between Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and those other countries because of the vacuum that we've created by not doing more.
One of the things that you were teaching us, if I have it right, is that Shia Muslims are a small percentage of worldwide Muslims, Sunni being the large majority. Can you just speak to us in general about all of the rest of the world? For example, it's my understanding that there's a large Muslim population in Indonesia, and of course the rest of the world. Is there any way of painting a broad brush across like Muslims in the United States and other places that we haven't discussed and what their feelings are in general?
The Muslim community, world community has 1.6 billion people. It is an incredibly large religion and is very, very diverse. So looking at the majority of American Muslims, they grow up, I like to joke about this fact, but in the United States, we have a common religion. And it's not Christianity, it's not Judaism, it's not Islamism.
Money, materialism?
No. Close. It's John Lockeism. There's individual rights and liberties. And all Americans, we embrace that as kind of a core secular ideology that's almost a religious belief. We don't understand other countries of the world who don't embrace. How can you not want liberty? Freedom. So for us, I think the American Muslim community is kind of fits in that mold. They're Americans, but they're Muslim. Where you get kind of the dangers are in some of the expatriate, the exile communities of Somalia, and some of the others where there are linkages to Al-Qaeda groups that are able to get in, and that's where we have to be especially vigilant in. But and the same I think is true for around the world. Indonesia's got its own set of problems, but they're Indonesian problems. What we need, though, is throughout the Muslim world,
leaders
of the Muslim world to come out, and theologians, the scholars, to say, this is not us. What is happening here is wrong, and that's not happening enough.
Okay. Another question. Yes, ma'am.
I see up here it says the threat to the U.S. homeland is real but should not be overstated. What do you see as the greatest threat to the U.S. homeland right now?
Well, I believe the greatest threat to homeland is, at this point, comes from these groups. But since 9/11, we have put lots of protective measures in place. It's not perfect. I mean, I think if you were to talk to anybody who deals with this on a policy basis, or they realize that, and you've heard this said before, we have to be right 100% of the time, and the bad guy only has to get lucky once.
So to the question, what's the threat?
The threat is...
Is it existential or is it real?
Well, I think that the threat is real, but it's real probably on small scale. It's individual bombings. It's things like like you saw in Boston, the Mall of America when that threat took place. I think those are the types of things that we have to worry about. Individual, small groups that would be dealt with on a law enforcement basis.
Okay, Mike, come on up.
Can we trust any of them?
Are you talking any of those countries?
The Shia, Sunni, Islam, Muslim, or can we trust any of them?
I think we have to learn to build partnerships and work with them as best we can. We need to put pressure on countries like Saudi. Well, first of all, I don't know who our allies are at this point. I mean, in Iraq, we're supporting a Shia-led government who has very close ties to Tehran, and they have Shia militias who have sworn allegiance, Valiati Faqih, to the Ayatollah. So you have these groups operating in Iraq, attacking Tikrit.
So to Mike's question, who can we trust?
I don't think you trust anyone. You
used the word partnership and avoided his question.
I did, and thank you for calling me on that, Roger.
Speak to the question.
We have to have mechanisms in place
Verify?
That we can verify what's taking place. We know with the Saudis, for example, and let me kind of be absolutely truthful.
You haven't been
I have
absolutely
been.
truthful so far?
Absolutely clear.
Okay.
The Saudis, the Jordanians, the Qataris, all these people that we have problems with in terms of their unwillingness to challenge Islamism in their community more, have done enormous amount of good for us and helped us tremendously in ways that the public doesn't see. In all of those situations, they are constrained by what they can and can't do by their own internal political dynamics and those groups in their country. They're all threatened by Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda affiliates. That's different than Tehran, whose stated goal is to kill America. So we have friends in the region who don't always do what we want, but friends never do. But they generally support us when we need their help.
Sounds pretty slippery, Rick.
It is very slippery. It is very slippery. It's very complex, and there's not a easy solution.
So the answer to Mike's question, if I'm hearing you right, is you can't trust, but you have to create partnerships and work toward verifiable, credible partnerships.
Partnership, verifiable relationships, long-term relationships that benefit both parties.
So there's a lot of honesty, transparency, even though we may disagree, but there's got to be...
Absolutely. And that's been going on for 30 and 40 years in the Middle East. So
All
we
right,
have...
quickly, Dee?
There seems to be spreading economic disaster between Libya and Syria and parts of Iraq. What do you think from an economic point of view the future's going to hold? Is this just going to be continual cycles where they keep blowing up the economies until they're finally back in the dark ages?
The problem on the economic side is you can't have economic growth without some degree of stability. And in all of these cases, you have political chaos and violence that is engulfing the various countries. And so it's not only the Middle East, but just look at what's recently been going on in North Africa and those countries in that region. Look at Libya. Libya is a disaster. It'll probably go down in history as one of the most crucial disasters in that part of the world, because you now have safe havens that are growing in that area that have direct transit routes to Europe. So significant problem.
So do you foresee in the future just a cycling of destruction, destruction, destruction?
I do. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of the rebirth or the birthing process of a new political order that is going to be very violent as it takes place.
So will that mean just a cycle of economic destruction?
I think it's going to be economic impoverishment for the majority of the people. But again, the leadership of these countries, this is where, when you talk about sanctions have limited capability to influence because the leaders always get the money. It's the people who suffer.
Okay. Bob? Okay.
This question is for the future. Okay. You mentioned about Russia being the big wolf. How do you see all this in context with Ezekiel 38 and 39?
Okay. As it relates to Russia being a part of the great... okay. Do you want to go on that one, or you just want to ignore that question?
Yeah, I don't know that I can answer that one.
Good, you're a smart man. All right, we had another question right here.
Okay, my question will be is, we all talk about the oil thing here. And Jensen talked about it this morning, and my thing is that we all want this oil. Is there a water problem over there? I've heard tell that there is a great water problem in that Israel has water. Does that play a factor in there anywhere
Israel
at
does
all?
not have water.
We
know that to be a fact. It is a problem. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it is a problem. If you look, and you look at any of these countries, if you look at Iraq, for example, you have the Euphrates and the Tigris. It's the only two sources of water that come into that country. And the sources of those waters aren't in Iraq. So water is a huge problem
Yeah,
in that
yeah,
part, and it's going to continue to be.
And same for Israel. I mean, there's a huge water shortage. Every water there is regulated. I mean, it's farmers are regulated. All right, we're going to keep going. We're going to go Marty and then Randy and then up to Spike.
So what's going on in Yemen?
Yemen is the most recent disaster. Several months ago, maybe half a year ago, the president argued that the way that we're fighting the terrorists in Yemen was a model for the future and how we continue to do this. And that model was putting small numbers of U.S. troops on the ground and enabling the government to do the fighting, using our advantage, which is they view as air power. Small numbers of troops and air power get you so far. It doesn't build you the type of partnership that you need in order to fight these things. And it also doesn't stop Iran. Nothing we have done has stopped Iran from their exportation of their Islamist revolution. And unless we're willing to go to the source and to support our Sunni our partners in the region to stop this, then we're going to continue to have that problem. But that country is in the middle of a civil war. I think you're going to see Egypt and Saudi, and you already have 10 nations saying that they're going to confront that. I don't think the Sunni nations of that region are going to allow a Shia-led government to exist there without
Didn't
confrontation.
Saudi just send bombings?
Saudis have put bombings. Egypt has put a fleet in. You've got the Saudi bombings also have UAE and Jordanians.
Okay.
This is huge.
All right, Randy, come on up. Here's the mic right here.
So if I understand it right, and though it's not life-threatening, Khomeini just had Operation for Cancer.
Was that-
Khomeini?
Yes.
So does that bring on the opportunity for power struggle for his successor, and could that interrupt Iran's ambitions?
So would you repeat the question?
Yeah, the Khomeini has recently been ill, and there's been discussion of whether or not there's going to be a power struggle. There's always a power struggle in Iran. I mean, we've only done this a couple of times now. But I think what's important is we keep on talking about we're going to deal with the moderate leadership in Tehran. There are no moderate leadership. Okay, you wouldn't get to that point in government unless you adhere to the general tenets. And so you go from maybe radical to extreme, but there are no moderates. And so whoever takes over from Khomeini is going to share in that fundamental teaching that there has to be one person anointed by Allah to be the supreme leader who will be the jurist who will make the determinations on Islamic law. That's part of their constitution. It's part of the teachings of their religion. I don't see that changing.
Okay, Spike?
We see in the news a lot about a lot of our young people in this country, in Canada, and other countries that are wanting to run off and go over and join up with these groups and cut people's heads off and shoot folks and everything else. What do you think the attraction is for these young people to want to be a part of that now?
That's a great question, Spike.
What is the attraction?
What's the attraction of young people in the United States and Western countries to go to Islam? And the attraction is varied. For some, it's the attraction of being part of this greater historic movement that is going to usher in the return of the Mahdi and the end of times, and that they need to be part of that. And so to be part of this, that is kind of the allure that gets them there. And now we also know that there's a lot of defections once people want to defect once they get there, except their fate isn't that very, very good, because they often get executed if they try to leave. So you have that. You also, so a lot of times you have just young kids, young women who see the opportunity to go and live this pure Islamic life, and it looks so good on the pictures. It's not so good once you get there. And that's been the problem. ISIS especially, they draw people in with their propaganda, but they're having trouble controlling people once they stay there. So that the viability of the Islamic State at this point is in question.
Okay. Phil?
Two different questions. So one of them is, in your years in Iraq, could you characterize the health of the Christian church in Iraq, and what has happened since then? And then the separate question, if I'm allowed to ask too, if you could address the topic of the likelihood and or the aftermath of a preemptive Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear facilities.
Yeah, the question on the Christian church is really sad. What's his name, Carol? Canon David White, a Anglican canon who had the largest church in Baghdad. Miracles were taking place there. People would, the canon would talk about the fact that there'd be Iraqis looking in on the street and being out there for hours and hours, knowing that they wanted to go in and talk to him because they heard about the miracles, but being afraid because of what would happen. He told a story about this one man who did that for about an hour, and he came in and he told the canon about what had happened, and the church community prayed for him, and his son had died. And by the time he came back, the boy was alive. Literally miracles were taking place there while we were in Iraq. The ancient Christian churches that were in that area, go back to the earliest days of our church. Most of them are now decimated. The majority of the Canon White's church has now fled Iraq for fear of what's taking place. The Assyrian church is now one of the first churches that Paul established. Is now either killed or has dissipated. It's a disaster in that region.
Okay, preemptive strike.
Preemptive strike, it would likely start a broader war, and Iran would likely be using ballistic missiles to attack Israel were that to occur. But I don't think if you're Israel, and I think Israel's made it clear, if they fear that the nuclear weapon is going to get there, they'll take that risk. Because the choice of not doing it is allowing them to have a nuclear weapon, which then could be used to annihilate them. So.
Okay, so are you saying they will do the preemptive strike or will not?
I'm saying that they will.
They will, okay.
That would be my guess.
All right. Jim?
Do we really know how close Iran is to having a nuclear weapon?
Do we know how close they are to having a nuclear weapon?
My caveat on that is I'm not a nuclear expert, and so I don't deal with that.
No, don't give us any caveats. Just tell us what you think.
I was going to do can I do the but?
No.
No? Okay.
Just tell us what you think.
I think we have a very good understanding about the breakout, and by breakout I mean
just tell us what you think.
I am. We know with a certain degree of surety that I think we feel comfortable with how long it will take. But we've been wrong a lot on these things.
So we don't know.
We're making best guesses on limited intelligence. And that's
what you're doing right now. You're just making best guesses, right?
Yes, I'm making best guesses.
So we don't know.
Sometimes you make best guesses based upon evidence that you have. I think in the intelligence world, especially
that's what we
something
did
like
in the Iraq War, and there was no evidence of weapons of mass destruction.
That's true. But you fill in the gaps, and sometimes you fill in the gaps wrong.
Okay.
And that's what happened in Iraq. It could also happen as we're thinking about
So
Iran
did this
today.
PhD answer your question, Jim? No, I didn't think he did. One more time, how close is Iran to nuclear weapons, in your humble opinion?
From what I've read, I believe they're about a year away.
Okay, that's all we were asking. That sounds great. All right, Kim's got the last question.
I don't mean this to be a political question by any means, but you keep talking about partnerships and partnering with different countries in the Middle East to address things. to address Iran. And of course, Iran has been, I mean, a threat for decades, really, like you said. I mean, it's been going on for a long time. So what do you see, again, not trying to be political, but just in your opinion, what do you see as the hesitation is that the U.S., you know, that keeps them from being more involved, whether it's being more aggressive towards Iran or even just partnering with some of the countries that are in that region? If you kept saying if they would do more, if they would do more, if they would do more. So why are they not, is in your opinion?
Okay, what I think you're asking is why isn't the Obama administration doing more?
No, don't make this political.
Why isn't the United States
Okay.
doing more in order to build partnerships that could help us deal with the region?
Okay. With Iran is
as it relates to Iran. And I think the reason is that the lesson learned by some from our experience in Iraq is that we shouldn't be there. We should, that having fewer people in that region is actually better than having more. And so from a ideological perspective and a philosophical view of the world, they believe that moving our forces out and doing less is actually better. And then there are those who look at this and saying, our partners in the region, the people have been partners. And again, to be fair to the government,
why don't you just simply tell us what you think?
Well, I'm trying to.
I see.
But there's never an easy answer on these things. They're trying to build up the capacity of those governments to do more. I believe there's a misunderstanding of what those countries are actually capable of. And without more direct U.S. involvement, they won't be able to do that which we wish they could. So it's a matter of how do you encourage that partnership. We all sides of the aisle.
How do you encourage a partnership that will not last very long?
Well, the partnerships that we had with Saudi Arabia has lasted for a long, long time.
With Iran?
With Iran, I don't. Well, first of all, when it comes to Iran, I don't think you can have a partnership there, because they are a sworn enemy. I mean, how do you have a partnership with an enemy? And so.
All right, we need to call timeout, people. This is 7:08 approximately. Rick, all I can say is outstanding job.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. It's nice to be home.
Please be seated. It's neat to see a brother in the Lord willing to go into difficult situations, put his own life on the line. Trying to navigate all this stuff is not an easy thing. Rick's going to be around for probably the next 30 minutes or so if you want to come down and ask him questions. Rick, we've got to have you come back. We would like to continue to put you on fire up here.
I'd love to do it.
And just give you a chance to continue to educate us. I feel a whole lot wiser, more informed on the big picture, so thank you very much. I'm going to pray for Rick, and we'll be dismissed. God, I thank you for Rick and Carol. I thank you for their family. Bless him, bless them. God, we ask that you would give us wisdom to see right from wrong based upon what the Bible says. Teach us, God, to offer compassion. Teach us to be wise, to verify. Father, we ask that you would continue to bless Rick, bless his writings, his book, his wisdom, his advice. Father, allow him to be able to influence, as he's done in the past, people around the world at the highest level of decision-making. Father, we ask that you would protect him, give him that Solomon-like wisdom. Father, help him to be a man of God in a very, very difficult environment. Father, thank you for each person here tonight. We're a bunch of imperfect people following a perfect Savior and a perfect Lord. We give you the praise for that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Would you express your appreciation one more time to Rick?
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.